In less than 3 years, Canada could have universal single-payer pharmacare. That's if the federal government, or whoever forms government in October, heeds the advice of an advisory council appointed to look into it. Today, the advisory council issued its final report. Here's its vision for pharmacare. First, the feds would create a national drug agency. It will come up with a list of essential prescription medicines that will be covered as of January 1st, 2022. That list will eventually become more comprehensive by January 1st, 2027. The government has already committed to that part, but the Advisory Council's final report says the taxpayers' co-payment for meds would be small, no more than $2 for essential drugs and no more than $5 for other drugs. No person, however, or household should spend more than $100 a year, according to the panel's findings, and there should be exemptions for those with low incomes. This would collectively save taxpayers $5 billion a year. Broken down, that's $350 on average per family, and for business owners, $750 per employee. The cost to government, though, $15.3 billion a year by 2027. So can the feds afford it? According to the report, quote, there is no easy answer to how to pay for national pharmacare. While the costs are undeniably significant, they must be weighed against the equally significant savings to Canadians. So what about that question? Can the government really afford that huge price tag? And why does the council believe a universal plan is the best approach? Dr. Eric Hoskins is the chair of the Advisory Council on the implementation of national pharmacare. He joins us now. Hi, Dr. Hoskins. Nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you as well.
Thank you for being with us. The conversation leading up to the release of this report was kind of framed as a binary choice, this idea that many had talked about, including the finance minister, of bridging the gap. So people who don't have coverage and can't pay for drugs or can't afford drugs, kind of addressing that versus the choice of a single-payer universal system. You obviously went with the latter. Why did you choose the latter over the former?
Well, the latter. So universal single-payer public has the big advantage of all Canadians coming together, and those that represent them, as a single purchaser of prescribed medicines for everybody. So that's the way you're going to find the enormous savings, frankly, of reduced drug prices, by being a strong negotiator with a lot of clout when you talk to pharmaceutical companies. And so, and it also improves the overall efficiency of the system. We have more than 100,000 different drug plans, more than 100 public ones, 100,000 private ones, all of them different, managed differently, negotiating separately. So this, what we heard in helping us make the decision from virtually everybody that we spoke to, a belief that access to prescribed medicines should be based on need and not ability to pay.
There are studies out there. I think a poll from Abacus showed that 86% of Canadians are satisfied with their private or group insurance in making medicine affordable. So I guess my challenge to you is, if that is the case, why not just address the 14% or so in their needs? Is it just driven by that sort of desire to see the overall costs come down?
Well, partly, but we also found over the course of the year that it was very difficult to identify where those gaps were. So, there's a small percentage of the population that is completely uninsured, no access to private or public. But in fact, the majority of people that experience what's called cost-related non-adherence, so they don't take their medicines at all or as they should because of price, the majority of them actually have public or private insurance. So there's about 7.5 million Canadians probably that are either uninsured completely or underinsured. But what it means is, for those 7.5 million Canadians, or about 1 in 5, is that they are struggling to pay for the medicines that are prescribed for them. So that's what led us to, and when we look back to the 1960s as well, when we were developing Medicare, something that Canadians are rightly proud of, there was that same debate, right, between fill the gaps versus based on need and not ability to pay, the universal. Had we gone with the fill the gaps approach in the 1960s, we would have an American-style healthcare system today in Canada. And so it's not that different, right? We're an anomaly in the entire world. There's no other jurisdiction that has the kind of mixed public-private model that we have. If we continue down that path, we won't get those benefits of the reduced drug prices for sure.
I know that benefit, and the PBO has highlighted, will end up saving Canadians over the long run. It also, though, a program like this means that there is an upfront cost that the government has to pay, and you have pegged that at about $15 billion annually by 2027, I believe the year is. Should the government run bigger deficits to afford that?
Well, we're leaving it to the government in consultation with the provinces and territories, because ultimately it's that relationship that has to determine the funding mechanism as well as the quantum and how to go about it. But what we've demonstrated through modeling is that compared to doing nothing, that bringing in universal single-payer public pharmacare will actually reduce the amount that's spent in Canada on prescription drugs by about $5 billion in that first year. And even, I think, to make this more real for Canadians as well, when you look at the household level or the family level, on average, families will save about $350 per year with national pharmacare. And employers, on the other hand, will save about $750 per employee by having a national public system take over that responsibility. And we're hearing that both individuals and families struggling to be able to afford medicines, of course, but also on the business side. We have to remember that anybody with precarious work or contract work, part-time work, generally doesn't have benefits, right? And even those who do on the employer side, employers are struggling to be able to afford those programs.
I take your point on all of that. I guess from a political perspective, though,
Yes.
when you're talking about the burden that the government has to shoulder, or the federal government, I'm wondering also, as someone who has experience in the provincial health, in a political role, obviously, is it all going to be on the feds? I mean, there's a lot of issues between the provinces and the feds right now, and even where healthcare is concerned, forget about the stripe at the government. A lot of times provinces are complaining about having to shoulder more of the burden than they think they should. Do you anticipate there being some kind of cost sharing, or how will that work?
Well, we recommend it's a form of cost sharing in the sense that the provinces and territories are already paying for their drug programs, right? It's currently a provincial and territorial responsibility. There are separate federal programs, of course, but what we're recommending is that the federal government pay the incremental, the additional costs of expanding coverage and making it more affordable and more accessible. That was what the Council of Federations last year asked for. We think that it is an important approach to take, partly because of the differing fiscal situation. But we've also created a stepwise approach, right, beginning in 2022 with essential to phase it in, to not only make it more affordable and sustainable, but also to allow the system to adjust to that transformation in prescription drug coverage.
This report is a landmark report, and in no way would I ever want to diminish its conclusions, but it's not the first to come to this conclusion. There have been many over the past 40 years who have recommended that there be a single payer public system for pharmacare. There has never been the political will to follow through on it. How worried are you that that political will still does not exist?
I think it does. We know that at least one major political party in the upcoming election has put it as one of their key platform planks. Do
you anticipate the federal Liberals will?
I believe that they've already demonstrated a real commitment. Just if you look at their actions in the spring budget, $500 million a year for expensive drugs for rare diseases, creation of the Canadian Drug Agency that's essential to build pharmacare in this country.
But they haven't gone so far as to say they endorse what you're talking about.
Well, they haven't. They just got the report today as well. So.
But they knew the option was out there.
Well, I think, and to give credit to the government, that this was truly an independent process, right? And the council's work was independent, and they gave me the ability, together with my council colleagues, to crisscross the country for the past year and meet with literally thousands of Canadians to get their perspective, to come up with a Made in Canada approach. Now it's the responsibility of the government, as well as the other political parties, as well as the provinces and territories and other stakeholders, to have a good look at it. But I think that you're absolutely right. There have been numerous reports. Every time a group of people have been asked to look at Canada's healthcare system, they've recommended national pharmacare, going all the way back to Emmett Hall in the 1960s, right? So it's certainly an idea whose time has come. I would argue this is like a perfect storm, right? Drugs are more expensive than they've ever been before. There are drugs out there that cost $1 million a year, right? And they hold so much more promise than in the past for restoring the health of people with chronic illnesses, for example, or saving lives. So with the electoral process, with the election coming up, I think is an advantage. It'll encourage a Canadian discussion by Canadians about this issue. And I'm very hopeful. I think that, probably this has been said by every chair of every council previously that recommended it, but I think we're in a different era, right? That we heard from every province and territory, and many private providers as well, and certainly many employers, that they're almost at the breaking point of affordability, and that's why this is so important now.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Dr. Hoskins. Appreciate your time today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This report, as we mentioned, now falls to the federal government, which says and will only say that it will review the recommendations. Meanwhile, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer says Canadians ought to be skeptical of the plan, while NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says his party has been calling for pharmacare for years. Here's some of the political reaction to this announcement today.
We certainly recognize that the cost of doing nothing is just going to be astronomical as well. But I think we have to keep in mind that putting together a national pharmacare program, if it was easy, I think that many governments would have done so in the past.
I don't believe that anybody thinks that when Liberals announce multi-billion-dollar spending programs that they're going to save money. And the fact of the matter is they've been making this promise since 1997. And in the dying days of a scandal-plagued government, they're trying to bring this forward.
We need to make sure that everyone in our country has access to medication. Too many people are languishing in emergency rooms, are dying because they don't have access to medication, are making tough decisions between food and medication. And this government, this Liberal government, hasn't committed to a universal, publicly delivered pharmacare for all program.
This report is an important step to lay the foundation of a national pharmacare program. For us, we're going to continue to make sure that Canadians can afford their medication as we move forward.
Does pharmacare work? What challenges should the federal government expect if it moves forward with implementation? One country that Canada could learn some lessons from is New Zealand, which introduced a national pharmacare program all the way back in 1993. Colleen Flood is the director of the Ottawa Centre for Health Law, Ethics and Policy at the University of Ottawa. She joins me now in studio. Hi there, nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you too.
You also have a lot of experience with this system in New Zealand. Tell us how the system there works.
So there they have a universal scheme that covers all New Zealanders, and it's publicly funded. And pretty much most New Zealanders pay, a very minimal amount as a co-payment, about $5 per script, and it's capped at an amount, a couple $100 a year, that you never have to pay more than that.
How novel of a concept was it when it was introduced? What was it like to get that system going?
So it actually came out of finance or treasury wanting to get more value for money from expenditures on pharmaceuticals. And it happened in about 1993, so quite a while ago now. The idea was to set up an agency, a little bit like what is being proposed by Eric Hoskins and his committee, to negotiate on behalf of the public drug plan for fairly priced pharmaceuticals so that all New Zealanders could access it.
So the driving force was to reduce the price, the cost?
Well, to get more value for money.
Right.
So not necessarily to reduce the price per se. They're willing to pay high prices for high value. But if it's a Me Too drug or a generic, then they're going to be negotiating pretty hard to get a reduced price.
And
folks.
If that's the if that was the motivating factor, how successful has it been? Or not?
Well, I think it's been incredibly successful from that perspective. If you're looking at prices, it has some of the lowest prices in the OECD. And New Zealand's a very small country. In 93, it was about 3 million people, and now it's about 5 million people. So, just being willing to negotiate, you don't have to be a big purchaser, but being willing to negotiate like you would normally in the market, you can get some pretty good, deals if you're willing to do that.
What about the cost of the system? That's a big question today. There are a lot of political questions about whether or not that cost would be prohibitive for the government.
Right.
What was it like in New Zealand?
Well, obviously, if you're shifting from private to public, there's going to be a bit more cost for the public healthcare system, right? And that's clear from the Hoskins report. But overall, you're going to save money, and that's clear everywhere. When you have a mix of public and private, you're going to spend more collectively. If you spend more from the public system on healthcare anyway, you tend to get better results, and you tend to spend less country by country, and that's true everywhere.
So overall, has it been sort of a cost saving in New Zealand?
Oh, absolutely, cost saving, and I think has led the world in showing that you can negotiate if you kind of take representing the public payer. That, I'm going to try to do my very best in negotiating that you can get good value for money.
Was it a phased-in approach? The one that's being recommended here is sort of phased in as well. Provinces will be able to sort of operate on their own timetable and opt in when they so choose. Was there anything similar?
Yeah, no. New Zealand's a bit different because it's a unitary country, so we don't have 10 provinces, 3 territories. So everything is a bit more difficult in Canada because we have division of powers, and obviously the provinces carry a lot of the can when it comes to healthcare. So we have to have different arrangements here in Canada, and it makes sense to, obviously you have to have agreement and buy-in from the provinces to some extent to pull this off.
Do you think that that's one among other sort of differences? I mean, I understand that the system was very similar in New Zealand, but New Zealand as a country, you mentioned the size of it, the fact that it doesn't have provinces or territories, whatever you want to call it. What do you anticipate some of the challenges here in Canada will be just by virtue of the size difference?
Well, not the size difference so much, but the system of government, clearly getting buy-in from the provinces. They are going to have to feel that what they are getting in terms of guarantees of stable funding from the federal government and surety in how long that will last is a critical, I think, for them to buy into this plan. And I'm not sure that paying, the difference between what they're doing now and what is needed to cover extra people will be enough. They may need more funding, but they surely will want to know that they're guaranteed their money going into the future and that some future federal government won't cut back the funding or not increase the funding and leave the provinces holding the can, as they have felt has happened with the rest of Medicare.
How about with, that's a really good point. What about with sort of political pressure either way, like even in New Zealand, although they don't have that provincial dynamic, has there been political pressure on the system? Like, is there one government that comes in and says, we're going to do away, we're going to keep?
Well, they don't usually say they're going to do away because I think it's incredibly popular. Often when it comes to free trade agreements, for example, bargaining with the United States, that's often the one thing they want New Zealanders to give up in exchange for better access to agricultural markets and things like that. But New Zealanders really resist that because they see the benefits of having universal pharmacare and getting a good deal. But from time to time, a new government will say, well, they're rationing too hard, or they should be covering X drug or Y drug. And they say when they're elected that they will come in and change that. Usually once they come in, then they realize if they keep that up, it's going to be, you're just going to politicize the system, and you really need to leave it to the experts to decide, what's the value of different drugs and which ones should we fund and not fund. And the key thing about New Zealand Pharmac, the pharmaceutical system, which makes it different from most other places, and why they get such a good deal, is that the government gives the agency a set budget every year. And they say, here's your money. You figure it out within that, how to get a good deal.
Does that money fluctuate, or is it pretty stable?
It's pretty stable. It's usually going up in some regards, but this means that the agency can, look the drug company in the eye and say, well, if you want this price, we have only got this much money, so we can't pay for it. If you lower the price, we can include you in the basket of services. And so they're negotiating, seems like from a diminished power perspective, but actually it gives them power in politics.
Good point. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time today. Thanks to Colleen Flood, Director of the Ottawa Centre for Health Law, Ethics and Policy at the University of Ottawa.
1993, 1997, 2004, 2015, time and time again, Liberals have promised to help deliver and result in lower cost of medication, but they failed to do so. This recommendation is over 40 years old. Wow. Canada needs single-payer pharmacare now. Why do Liberals only have a plan to delay?
This report is an important step to lay the foundation of a national pharmacare program. For us, we're going to continue to make sure that Canadians can afford their medication as we move forward with.
Canada needs a universal pharmacare program. That's the conclusion, at least, of an advisory panel that studied the current patchwork of varied private and provincial plans across Canada. The panel says Canada can't afford not to create a national pharmacare plan. Welcome back to Power and Politics in the Power Panel with Anne McGrath, Amanda Alvaro, Tim Powers and Marie Vastel. Marie, I'm going to start with you. How likely do you think it is that the Liberals adopt, we know that the NDP is, of course, in favor of this, but that the Liberals adopt this in their election platform?
I think it's a guarantee.
Really?
Well, they've pretty much, sketched it out and said it will be. It was also a priority resolution at their last convention last year. I think it's a given that this will be part of their platform. I also wonder how much of a given it is that it will be quite vague in their platform, because essentially the panel is saying you should do this, start in 2022, and then ramp up the number of the quantity of medication that will be covered until 2027. That being said, they need to consult with provinces. The Minister of Health, Ginette Petitpas-Taylor, did say, we won't force anyone. We're going to try and get everyone to opt in. That presumably takes a long time. And they're not really in a position to impose anything to provinces right now, given what we just talked about, C-69, another variety of topics. So I think there is a real will from the Liberal government to do this, and there is an intention, and they will campaign on it because it's a great way to take a big argument away from the NDP, right? And they need those progressive voters for the next election. But I really anticipate that it will be lacking in details, given that they can't say we'll do this, because they can't really presume
Predict
what provinces. Yeah, and you already have Quebec saying, well, we're going to opt out with full compensation. So there goes a big one that doesn't want to be part of it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what's happened at the provincial level for years and years and years. I think for over a decade or longer, the provinces have been trying to come up with a common purchase plan for drugs, and the assumption in doing that is that be able to be retailed more cheaply for Canadians who need them. The Conference Board of Canada said in 2017 that 98% of Canadians either had a private or some form of public care program already. So is this really the best way to go? And then there's the obvious one, is the cost. So if it is going to cost, I think he said $15 billion
a year by 2027.
So what other things go down as a consequence of that, or do taxes go up? And then, look, they can be called partisan questions, but they're legitimate questions. And then there's the broader issue of, is this the best way to administer health care in the country too? Are there things that can be done beforehand? So there's lots of questions to be asked. I guess the greatest political vulnerability for the Liberals is the one Marie was talking about. Is the intent real? Because they have talked about it, as Jagmeet Singh has said, since 1993. Are they going to commit to it, and what will they actually be committing to?
Amanda, what do you think?
Well, I think the intent is more than real. It's happening. And they're certainly committed to a pharmacare program that's national and universal, to bring drug prices down, to make it more affordable for Canadians. And the proof is in the pudding. The fact that they put forward this panel in order to come up with these recommendations that are required, especially from a costing perspective. Does the design look exactly the way the panel has proposed? I don't know. I think obviously it's too early to tell. This is the report that's just come forward. But there's more proof than just that. The Liberal government also in the last budget talked about the Canada Drug Agency to negotiate pricing to bring those costs down, and funds that were put forward for rare diseases. So this is a government that's not just speaking out of one side of its mouth and doing something on the other. This is a government that's committed in making things happen, unlike the Conservatives, who are obviously flirting with privatization, and we're seeing all of these cuts in provinces, especially in Ontario. So Marie's absolutely right. How do you move this forward? First of all, you need the buy-in from the provinces, especially in provinces where cuts to healthcare are a real and looming concern, like in Ontario. So how do you negotiate with the Premier Ford? How do you make sure that the Conservative premiers are going to get on side with a program like this? That would take obviously a next mandate for them to get there.
The only thing I would say to that, and I'll get Anne to weigh in now, is that yes, you're absolutely right. The Liberals did put aside money for the things that you mentioned in the last budget. That's very different than saying you're going to spend $15 billion a year on universal single-payer drug coverage, right? Like they have yet to commit to that very specifically, and I know that the indications are there, but the money has not been allotted at this point. And what do you think? I know obviously the NDP has called for this for a long time.
Yes, and the single-payer model that they're putting forward is the model that we have in healthcare. It works in healthcare. It's good public policy. I'm very happy to have this a vigorous public discussion on how we improve healthcare rather than cut it or privatize it or any of those kinds of things. So I'm really quite happy about this report. I think that Marie is right. It will guaranteed it will be part of the platform, but the danger is in whether or not there are any details, how vague it is, and of course the provinces that agreed to work together on this at the Council of the Federation had different governments in many of those provinces at that time. So I don't know what the provincial buy-in is going to be now. And you know, Amanda is right. In provinces like Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, what's on the table right now is a significant fears about whether there'll be cuts to healthcare rather than actually improving it. And let's remember, you know, Tommy Douglas's name has been surfacing in interesting ways.
As of late, yes.
These days. But certainly his vision of Medicare and public health care included, you know, a drug plan, home care, and dental care. And I think it's great that we're going to have the discussion about how we proceed on actually having this it's really important. And it's also, I'll just conclude with this, incredibly good economic policy. And I think when we're talking about things like childcare or pharmacare or any of those kinds of things, we have to remember that these are not just good public policy, good health policy, good for equality for women, but also that it's really excellent economic policy. It improves the budget, improves the bottom line, improves the health and well-being of Canadians, and improves our budgets.
Are Conservatives, Tim, a little bit vulnerable there in that, yes, it's of course a cost to government and a very large one, and it's an understanding that would be pointed out, but that the PBO has even independently said this will actually save Canadians a lot of money over the long run.
Maybe on this particular issue, there's a degree of vulnerability, but I want to pick up something both Anne and Amanda said. We're not really having a discussion about the healthcare system. We're back to the 2000 election debate where Amanda invoked part of it there a moment ago. Conservatives suggest they want to privatize it. Well, I haven't heard Andrew Scheer say any of that. I wish he would, actually. I wish there would be a legitimate debate and discussion, but we can't have it, about how the system, a system, and we already have lots of private healthcare in this country, how the public and private systems as they exist could work well together. It's not going to happen because the first Conservative other than me that does that is going to be tattooed by Amanda, by Anne, by everybody else saying, oh, you don't understand, it has to be universal health care. That's crap. It doesn't have to be. The system could be better served if we had a mature discussion, but the maturity and the discussion are probably only going to be found here.
So what you're saying here is you're the only mature person.
No,
what you're trying to claim. We're in trouble if that's the case.
I don't want Jack Bauer to come shoot me, Jack. Sorry, don't shoot me.
You're Kiefer Sutherland's next target. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.